Tech Talk. I'm Rick Noriega, Interim Executive Director for Universal Services and CIO, and we just want to welcome you to our 4th edition of Tech Talk. This morning, we have a very special guest. From what I've been shared with my colleagues, you're bringing Jeff Linder on. He's like our internal county celebrity. He's on TV all the time, and we love Jeff. And so for those of you who don't know Jeff, we get a chance to introduce him today, talk a little bit about our relationship with Universal Services, the projects that we're working on. In addition to, with all of that greeting, I also did want to say happy belated Mother's Day, happy Memorial Day. Don't forget to get your shot. That's why today our protocols, we've got our plexiglass, we're still 6 feet apart, but we're not with masks today. Hope everybody gets vaccinated. And so with that, it's an honor for me to be able to introduce Jeff Linder. He is our county meteorologist, and he's with flood control with a fellow Aggie, Russ Poppy, over at flood control, our friend Russ. And so I think here's a little piece in reading about you, Jeff, that I didn't know. And for all of our friends in Harris County, you know, in 2019, our own Jeff Linder was one of 4 persons who was considered Meteorologist of the Year across the United States for an award. And I think maybe that's because of all the flooding we have in Harris County and so forth. You're on TV a lot.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And you know, you're exactly right. And thanks for having me. Thanks for putting this on, because you know, we're getting towards hurricane season, and we need to start talking about preparedness and everything we need to start doing here. So yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And of course, flood control is a critical department and asset to Harris County. I think I read created in 1937, the 45th legislature, and y'all's mission statement on your website is really great. For those of y'all that haven't seen it, they got a phenomenal website. It's going through, you were sharing with me an update: devise, implement, maintain. I mean, very succinct, very clear. And as you mentioned, one of the tabs on there talks about hurricane season and hurricane preparedness. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so hurricane season starts on June the 1st, which is just a couple weeks away. And, you know, we have to be ready here in Southeast Texas and Houston. That first week of June, back in 2001, we had Tropical Storm Allison on June the 5th. And so we have to be ready to go that first week of June. And so it's really important right now. Kind of looking at the forecast this year, we are looking at the potential for another active season. Of course, last year, 2020, we had 30 named storms, the most active season ever in the Atlantic Basin. And of course, most of us know our poor neighbors in Louisiana were just absolutely devastated by 5 tropical storms and hurricanes that made landfall in the state of Louisiana. So we were very fortunate here in Southeast Texas. We had Tropical Storm Beta in September with a little bit of flooding. But we were very, very fortunate, and it's important to know that regardless of the numbers, regardless of it's an active season, it's a not active season, regardless of those forecasts, you have to be prepared every year, because it only takes one. If we get hit this year with a tropical storm or a hurricane, it's a bad season for us. And you always have to be prepared. And one of the things I want to talk about with preparedness, because a lot of people prepare from the last event we went through. And for most of us, that's going to be Harvey. And Harvey, even though we call it a hurricane, and it was a hurricane down at Rockport and Port Aransas, Harvey here in Harris County was a big flood. And we did not see the wind. We did not see the widespread power outage. We did not see roofs torn off homes. We did not see trees down. We did not see a big storm surge, and storm surge down on the coast is that rise of the seawater, the saltwater flooding that can be devastating. We haven't seen a storm surge here since Hurricane Ike back in 2008. And so when you prepare for hurricanes and then you prepare for hurricane season, you have to prepare for all of those hazards: the wind, the storm surge. And if you're in a storm surge evacuation area, you need to have a plan where you evacuate that area if you're told to do so. If you're not in that area, you need to have a plan to be sheltering in place. We're not going to be asking you to evacuate if you live in Cypress or Katy or even in downtown Houston. Evacuation is for those coastal areas, those folks down near the coast. And of course, as we go through a lot here, the rainfall and flooding aspect of it. And so build your kit, build your plan around all those hazards, all those potential impacts, and build that plan for you and your family. Your plan is different from my plan, is different from your plan, because we all have different circumstances. And so you have to build that plan and that kit and those supplies for you and your family.
That's good to know. And in fact, our colleague, Mark Sloan, when he was on the show last time, I mean, we're all stomping our feet and saying the same thing about preparedness. Now, as you mentioned, and he mentioned too, you know, once the initial, if we were hit by a hurricane, the wind and that destruction and whatnot, what really gets us is the floodwaters, right, Mark? I mean, right, Jeff? Is that right? It's the floodwaters that, as you suggested in Harvey. What can we do when you say, like, if we go to the website, flood control website, there is a tab there, right, Jeff, where it'll walk us through how to put our kit together that you're suggesting.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you can go to the Harris County Flood Control District website. We have a tab for preparedness and hurricane preparedness and flood preparedness. You can also go to Ready Harris, which is the county's emergency management website, which has great information too. Again, you take those kind of generic lists, you put some of those in there, but then you also put the specific supplies, the specific medications, and that type of stuff specific to you and your family in your kits also. And so definitely start with those websites. And one thing I'd like to bring up right now also is when we get into situations like this, we get into weather situations, be it a flood, the winter storm, a hurricane, use trusted sources. Get your information from trusted sources, television, media, county officials. That's who you need to be listening to. Not everything you see on social media is always correct. And so verify what you're seeing, verify what you're hearing with those trusted sources.
That's a really good point. And I know that after Harvey, I just picked up on an article about a real surge of new gauges and monitors that have been installed post-Harvey for the purposes of doing some of the geo mapping and things that flood control is doing a really superb job with. Can we pull up one of those maps and let Jeff share some of the work that they're doing? So what does this map here do, Jeff? What are we, and is this will be available to the public, or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is our public facing flood warning system.
Now this goes back to your point, get information from trusted sources, and this is a trusted source about a flood warning tool.
Right.
Yeah. So tell us how this works.
Yeah. So this is our network of gauges. We have about 180 in Harris County, and then we've added about 100 with interlocal agreements in the county surrounding us. Of course, you know, we're a regional area. We people from Fort Bend County, Sugar Land, Richmond, Rosenberg, they drive into downtown, the Woodlands, Conroe, and so it's important to have the data from outside of the region also. And so the particular map you see is showing the current rainfall in the past 24 hours, which is a bunch of zeros. We haven't had any rain in the last day or so, but this will tell you how much it's rained in whatever specified time period. You can go to 15 minutes, you can do the last hour, you can do the last 7 days, you can do the last year. And that shows you the rainfall. And so that we operate, the flood control district operates and maintains these gauges across the area. And then we also have the channel status map that we can take a look at here. So that's rainfall, but then what is the channel doing? You know, just because it rains 2 or 3 inches, it doesn't mean the channel, the creek or the bayou is going to flood. And so we developed this kind of, you know, very basic red, yellow, green, yellow, red map to show potential problems on our creeks and bayous. So right now it's all green, everything's good. If we were to go and see some yellow like we did a couple weeks ago when we had some rain, that would mean that some flooding is possible in the low-lying areas. And if we start to see red on this map, that means flooding is likely. That means the potential for overbank flooding and structure flooding and house flooding and things like that. And so You know, this tool was actually developed at the request of our TV media.
Interesting.
Some of them came and said,
Yeah.
"Hey, we just want a snapshot. Show us
Yeah.
where it's bad in the
Right,
county."
right. Now, I know that your colleague, Justin Terry, has, and yourself have been working on this particular product, and we're assisting with some interfacing infrastructure and data and so forth. So this is but the public would be able, say for instance, I live, let's just say along White Oak Bayou, as an example. I could go to this site and monitor and keep track of how that water perhaps is rising, and if it's, as you mentioned, green, red, yellow, and then that alerts me at what point, what's my trigger point then that I want to either get out of here or I know I'm going to shelter in place now, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. One of the features that we developed after Harvey, because a lot of people told us during Harvey, well, your gauge says it's 60 feet. I don't know what my house elevation is. I don't know if it's 62 or 65 or whatever. So that reference of 60 feet doesn't mean a lot to me. And so one of the features we developed after Harvey was near real-time inundation mapping from our creeks and bayous. And it's not going to show up today because there's no flooding. But you can go to this website when it's flooding and you can see the footprint. You can see where the water is that is outside of the channel from the creek or bayou. So you know, is the water getting close to you? And this updates about every 15 minutes.
Wow.
And so you can tell, hey, I don't want to go that direction because it's flooded up there. Hey, it's 3 streets over, it's 4 blocks over. An hour ago was 8 blocks over. It's getting closer. The water's getting closer. So I need to be paying attention. And so it's a pretty powerful tool.
Yeah, and I think along with that, talking and working with law enforcement, we and an emergency management office, we also now have a particular tool that's a GIS tool that, as a sheriff's deputy or someone or a constable puts a cone down that you cannot now say for instance the highway is blocked or whatnot. The law enforcement officers will know, and folks will be able to start seeing which roads are blocked because of water, to your point, and which way, what are the paths that they can't take.
Yeah.
I wanted to go now to another tool that it's the Map Next, a particular product that we've been working on together. Ron Rainmaker was a project manager on this particular tool. And maybe you can share with us what this particular tool will do to help inform both internally and externally for the county.
Yeah, so MapNext is our project we've been working on ever since the rainfall, NOAA 14 was released, and that was the update of the rainfall for this region. And so the end result of that is going to be new floodplain maps for Harris County, and this is going to be some of the most accurate mapping that we've seen anywhere in the United States here in Harris County. And
Wow.
so this is the end result of that is a website that allows the residents of this area to type in their address and explain to them their flood risk. And if we could talk about flooding and floodplains and flood risk, every single person in this county has a flood risk. We all have a flood risk, and it's imperative. If this map here, we put in the address, you can see the location we're at. Technically, we're outside the floodplain. 60% of the homes that flooded in Harvey and that flooded in Allison and that flooded in Tax Day were outside the floodplain.
Yeah.
They were not required
Right.
to have flood insurance.
Yeah. My mother's house is an example near Hobby Airport. If you looked on then FEMA maps, her house, I guess the latest FEMA map may have been like 2000 or something like that. I forget what it was. Hers was just outside the FEMA, map that was public, but her house flooded.
Right.
And it was probably within 500 feet of where the edge border of the old map was. And now I suspect, I guess, her house would be in a new FEMA floodplain map, but at the very least, she could go here and see whether or not she has a particular risk. She's probably in a floodplain map now. Does it have any tie to FEMA and whether or not I should get flood insurance?
Absolutely, yeah. So FEMA is the agency that approves these maps. So we do all of the technical work in the background. We send it to FEMA for them to approve it, and then they become public, as you see. And one thing to remember about floodplains is they're simply a rate insurance. They're a rate map. They're a how much you're going to pay. If you're inside the floodplain, you're going to pay more. If you're outside the floodplain, you're going to pay less for flood insurance. Again, every single person should have flood insurance. It takes 30 days to go into effect. Hurricane season starts in 2 weeks. You need to get it right now. Flood insurance is not issued when there's a storm in the Gulf of Mexico. You cannot get it. So it's important to get it now. Here's a statistic: 30% of Harris County residents have flood insurance.
Wow.
Even after everything we've been through, Harvey, tax day, Imelda.
And that's 4 million people.
4 million people,
30%. Wow. So a little bit more than 1 million people of the 4 million, somewhere in that ballpark, have flood insurance. And incidentally, I know because I've had to buy it and help my mother purchase it.
Right.
I mean, $100 is $100 and $120, and that is a lot. But it's a lot less to pay that than have to replace all your furnishings and so forth within a house. And Robert's over there shaking his head up and down. He's saying, "Yeah, you're right." But in the end, it is fairly reasonable living here in Harris County versus if you had to have storm insurance if you lived in Galveston County as an example.
Yep.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and on the insurance side. I think you hit it.
Yeah, one thing a lot of people I don't think realize, especially just coming off the winter storm, homeowners insurance does not cover flood. It does cover for most of the time your pipes that break, and I think a lot of people, water is water, right?
Yeah. Homeowners
insurance does not cause water rising from the ground from rainfall. That is a separate policy that you have to purchase, which is flood. I think there can be sometimes some confusion because of pipe breaking. Well, that's my carpet got wet from water. That's fine. Homeowners insurance will cover that, but it does not work that way with flood. You have to have that separate policy. And you're right. It's relatively cheap if you're outside the floodplain, about $400 to $500 a year. And let me give you this example. After Harvey, the payout for an insurance claim on average was about $120,000.
Wow.
That's an insurance claim. That's someone who had flood insurance. The payout for somebody who did not have flood insurance, who got FEMA assistance, was $4,000 to $8,000.
$4,000 to $8,000.
$4,000 to $8,000.
Wow.
So imagine trying to put your house back together that got flooded with a foot of water with $8,000.
$8,000. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And so then with population density, with more concrete being poured in the county as we continue to grow, the risk, and I mean, I'm assuming continues to rise, the possibility of potentially being flooded.
So, the biggest risk we have, and flooding's our natural disaster here. It's going to happen no matter how much infrastructure we put in. And I think Harvey was the realization of this. If you get 40 inches of rain, you're going to flood.
Right.
You can put in as many bayous as you want, as many detention basins as you want, you're still going to have issues. And so what we're focusing on at the flood control district is flood damage reduction projects. And I use the words exactly like that. Mm-hmm. Reduction. They're not elimination. They're never going to eliminate the flood risk here.
Yeah, good point.
And so you put in these flood damage reduction projects to reduce that risk of flooding in the areas that have a lot of flooding, continuing problems of flooding. And one of the interesting statistics is that most of the structures that flood were built back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, before we really had a good idea where the floodplains are. Homes that have been built from the 90s onward historically do not flood that much in the county. They can. Yeah. But the repetitive loss areas, the places that keep flooding over, you hear the same subdivisions over and over again: Meyerland, Greens Point, Jersey Village. It's these older areas that were built. They're very deep in the floodplain, and at some point there's just not an infrastructure project that can completely reduce that risk there.
Yeah, interesting. Because I think that people have it's a misnomer that flood control is responsible for your city drainage. So flood control, and just correct me if I'm wrong, are those outlet waterways, if you will, that's going to dump, heavy water eventually out into the Gulf. But the connectivity from whatever municipality or mud district that you're in is pushing the water into the bayou system to get it out. Is that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah. So flood control, what we have the open channel network is what we call it. So we have the creeks and the bayous, and some of the what we call lateral channels that carry the water from the neighborhoods to the creeks and the bayous. When you're talking about street drainage, roadside ditch, that's your county precinct,
right,
or your city, if you're in an incorporated city, and they handle those drainage issues. And it's important to recognize that even though they're separate entities, separate jurisdictions, the street system is part of the drainage network.
Mm-hmm.
We purposely design streets here to flood because we build them below grade because we're flat. We only have about a foot per mile of elevation. And so when we get these really intense rainfalls, 4 and 5 inches an hour, we have to store the water somewhere.
Right.
And it's better to store it in the street than in the homes. And so I know how frustrating it can be that you can't go somewhere because the street's flooded. Just give it some time, let that drainage system catch up with that, and never drive into high water. We talked about the barricades a minute ago. Don't go around barricades. Most of our flood fatalities are vehicle related in this county and at underpasses.
Wow.
So please don't drive around the barricades.
But what you can do, though, is keep that gutter clean in front of your house, right?
Right, yes,
get all those leaves out of there and get that so that water's draining. On another note, two real quick points before we have to start closing is the flood bond issues. Back to your point earlier about trying to mitigate a little bit. So along Sims Bayou, some of the bridges are being raised. That actually and being widened. That actually does help move water a little faster, hopefully, long term. Is that what the purpose is?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Again, we're talking about ages of stuff. And so some of these bridges were built back in the 50s and they're very low. We build bridges, they have lots of columns. Technology has allowed us to build things differently now. And anytime you don't impede the water, so if you don't put something there for the water to strike, be it the bridge deck or the columns, it's going to flow a lot easier. And so, bridge replacements are a big thing. Even replacing culverts and other, railroad bridges. Railroad bridges are a really big one because they have a lot of crossing. All of that type of stuff, raising pipelines, getting pipelines out of the way, all of that helps the flow of water. And so, and I think there's one thing to be said about the bond, and a lot of times people don't realize the work that's being done. You don't necessarily see it. You don't necessarily know who's doing it. And sometimes there's things going on behind the trees and behind the black fences and the blackout stuff to keep the dirt down and everything that you don't realize is a project to help reduce your flooding risk. But there's a tremendous amount of work. We've done more work in the last 2 years than we've done in a long time at the Flood Control District from the bond funding, and it's countywide. It's in a lot of different watersheds. And one of the important points to make is because a lot of people say, well, you focus on this part of the county, you focus on that part of the county. But when you start talking about hydrology, you want to keep the water from going downstream, right? So you don't want to impact the people downstream. And so a lot of times you have to build basins and stuff like that on the upstream part, the parts in the western part of the county, because our water drains from west to east. You hold that water up there, but it benefits you down low. So you might not see a lot of work down where you live, but it's what's upstream of you that really matters for you.
Well, that's good to know, Jeff. I think I got a little nervous at the outset with having my first celebrity. We're not quite ready to replace Ellen DeGeneres yet, but we're working on it. So in closing, as we're preparing for hurricane season, Jeff, any parting messages we want to really make sure that we emphasize going into hurricane season? Oh, we're going to take questions. I'm sorry. I'm getting the questions note. So let's see what kind of questions we have. Mr. Linder told me when it was time to leave my house before it flooded a few years ago. This anonymous person is giving me a thumbs up and saying, thank you, Jeff, for telling that person to leave the house. Have fun with this, Jeff. Been looking forward to it. Someone else gives you another thumbs up. What is the status on construction of a dam similar to the one in the Netherlands?
Oh, so that would be the coastal barrier. So again, talking about the different types of flooding we have, we've really talked a lot this morning about the rainfall, the inland flooding. But we also have this concern about the seawater flooding, the storm surge that can come inland from the coast during a hurricane. And so there's a Corps of Engineers plan sort of in place now called the Coastal Barrier that would bring a gate system similar to the Netherlands to the area between Bolivar and Galveston, and then have an armored type dune system along Bolivar and the west end of Galveston to help prevent storm surge from getting into Galveston Bay. But that's where it's at right now. It's kind of in that planning phase and that type of stuff.
Yeah, I saw, in fact, with the federal discussions on infrastructure, a lot of our federal delegation from this region are pushing.
Yep.
Now that the dollars, I mean, this may be the one time that the dollars may be available to take on a project of that magnitude for our part of the world, if you will. So we had a 5 thumbs up on any chance that you can put the URL up for the 2 sites. Harris County, I guess it was the flood dashboard that's been put up, the warning dashboard, in addition to the map next that's been put up for our guests. In addition, can we download the Harris County apps on our phones to access the flood maps?
Yeah, so the flood warning system is it's a web-friendly, mobile-friendly version of that. So you can go to the same URL on your phone, harriscountyfws.org, and there's a mobile version. I'm not sure about the map next. I don't know if there's going to be a mobile version of that or not.
Yeah, we're working on it actually.
Okay.
We have 23 projects. Universal Services is working with flood control, and one of them, God willing, will be that. Kind of like your shower data kind of thing on your, pedestrian can have that on their phone. We hope that we're going to get to that point sometime soon. And there was a question that came in, or a comment, Jeff, do we have a recording of this talk that we can send out? And the answer is yes. Give us a little while. Once we have it completely recorded, downloaded, Andy on our team will send it out to all of the employees in Harris County. Y'all have a phenomenal communications team over there at Flood Control. Does a great job. We'll make sure and get it to them so they can push out too. This is some very critical information, as you mentioned, going into the flood season. So that's where now I've got the 2-minute sign that I can start doing the wrap up. I mean, we can talk about anything. Aggies football potential season coming. Looking. I was watching the Aggies baseball play Ole Miss last night for a little bit. I don't know how that game turned out, but anything as well that you'd like to share with us, Jeff, before we close?
I think I'm just happy that it looks like we're going to get to do it in person as we get into the fall. So I think that's a thumbs up for all of us getting those shots and everything.
Right.
I think we talk about preparedness and we hear it so much here, and we almost kind of glaze over when, they're telling me to get ready again. And I just got ready for the winter storm, right? I just got through getting done with COVID and all of this type of stuff. But I can't stress enough, you have to be prepared, and you have to be prepared. And being prepared is more than saying, yeah, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive to Brenham. That's the start of a plan. But where are you going to go in Brenham? Do you have family in Brenham? Do they know you're coming? Are you taking pets? Do you have, all of this
your
stuff?
Meds, like you said.
Your medications. Yeah. And it's just really important that you take a minute here over the next couple of weeks and you really think about this and you have a plan. And this is a plan you can use for anything. The same plan you develop here for the winter, for hurricane season, you could have used for the winter storm. Probably could have used some of it for COVID when that started. And so once you kind of sit down and get this thought through and everything, you can use it for different things.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I mean, if nothing else, Jeff, our community, our county is super resilient. If you think just over the last 3 years, Harvey, the main pipes of the city of Houston busting about a year and a half ago, the winter storm, a global pandemic. I mean, we here in Harris County are resilient, and I'm glad we're not, there's some demasking messages out there, but we need to get our shots. And please, the other thing too that could impact flood control a lot in terms of technology. Cyber, take your cyber testing. There are employees still in the county that have till the end of this month to take your cyber training. Please do that. Please get your shot and get ready for this next hurricane season. On behalf of Jeff and I and all of the employees at Universal Services throughout the county, have a great weekend and thank you for joining us.